Montana Territory, 1883. Dust swirled off the train wheels as it rolled into the small town of Red Bluff, and Persephone Kline stepped down with her head held high, though her heart was cracking in two. She adjusted her bonnet, making sure the fabric covered the left side of her face. The scar stretched from her cheekbone to her jaw, a reminder of the fire that had taken her family and nearly her life when she was 16. Now 23, she had tried everything to forget the smell of smoke and the way people's eyes lingered too long, but today was supposed to change things. She had come west to marry a man who had written her letters kind letters, filled with promises of a quiet life on a ranch and maybe one day, a family. Except he was not at the station. Persephone stood on the platform with her carpet bag pressed tight to her side as passengers cleared out, dust settling around her boots. She waited, and waited. But no man approached, no one called her name. Finally, a boy with a telegram cap walked up, chewing on a sliver of jerky. "You Miss Kline?" "Yes," she said, feeling the first twinge of unease. He handed her a folded note, then turned and walked off. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "I saw your face in the photograph. I cannot marry you. Do not come looking for me." She swallowed hard. Her body felt like it had turned to stone. She stood there for a long time, unsure where to go, unsure why she had believed anything could be different. A cough came from behind her. She turned to see a tall man leaning against the hitching post. He looked like he had ridden straight off a cattle drive, dust on his boots, sun in his skin, and a rifle slung easy over one shoulder. His hat was tipped back, revealing a sharp jaw and dark eyes that watched her without flinching. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. "No," she said, her voice catching. "Not anymore." He stepped forward, his boots stirring the dust. "Saw you came off the train alone. Folks here talk. I heard the name of the man you were supposed to marry. He left town 3 days ago, took his cattle and ran." Persephone didn't answer. She just nodded once and looked away, blinking fast. "I am Ira McAllister," he said, voice steady. "Got a spread about 10 miles north of here. Not much, but it is mine." She glanced at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I hate cowards," he said, "and I hate the look you got right now. Like the world just proved you right about it being cruel." She stared at him, unsure what to say. "I am not offering marriage," he said carefully, "but I have an open bunkhouse, a spare room in the house if you would rather. You can stay until you figure out what comes next." Persephone hesitated. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" He met her eyes. "Because you are not the first person to get burned by someone's fear. And because I was raised to help when I see someone standing alone." Her fingers clenched the telegram tighter, then she gave one slow nod. "All right," she said. "I will come." The ride out to his place was silent but not uncomfortable. Ira rode beside her, never pushing conversation, just keeping pace. His ranch was a modest one, a long, low house with smoke curling from the chimney, a small barn and rolling land broken by cottonwoods and creeks. The wind smelled of sage and sun-warmed grass. He helped her down from the wagon, and for the first time she caught him looking directly at the scar on her face. But he did not flinch. He just offered his hand. "You will have your own room," he said. "I will fix up something warm to eat." Persephone blinked. "You cook?" "I do not starve," he replied dryly. That night she sat at his table, eating stew in silence while the fire crackled and a storm rolled low outside. Ira moved with the calm of a man used to quiet, used to being alone. "You do not ask questions," she said suddenly. He looked up. "Only when someone wants to answer." She nodded, then looked down at her bowl. "The scar happened when I was 16. House fire. I was the only one to make it out." He did not say he was sorry. He did not offer a soft word she could not bear to hear. He just nodded once. "You will not find pity here," he said, "but you will find work and space to breathe." That night she lay in the small room he had prepared. The linens smelled faintly of cedar. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and for the first time in months, she breathed without the weight of someone else's judgment pressing in. Over the next days, life found a rhythm. Persephone rose early, helped gather eggs, swept the porch, and learned how to saddle a horse without falling flat. Ira was patient but never patronizing. He showed her how to mend a fence and how to haul water without slopping it all over her skirts. He never looked away from her face. One morning, after they had spent hours digging out a clog from the creek, she collapsed into the grass with a laugh. Her hair was damp with sweat, and her skirts were muddy, but she felt something close to free. Ira stood nearby, hands on his hips, watching her laugh with something unreadable in his eyes. "You know," she said, sitting up, "you are not what I expected from a cowboy." He raised a brow. "Is that so? You are quiet, gentle, you do not speak unless it matters," he shrugged. "Words are easy. Actions stay." She watched him for a long moment. "You are not afraid of ugly things, are you?" His gaze flicked to hers. "You are not ugly, Persephone," she swallowed. "You are the first man to look me in the eye and say that." His jaw tightened. "Then the men you knew before were blind." Something warm bloomed inside her chest. She turned her face toward the sun, letting it touch the scar without flinching. Ira sat beside her in the grass, close but not too close. As the wind stirred the grass around them, he said quietly, "You do not have to leave, not unless you want to." She looked at him, her hand brushing the grass between them. "I do not want to," he nodded slowly. "Then stay." And she did. The spring rains came late, soaking the earth in slow, steady sheets that made the soil rich and the air thick with the scent of wet bark and wild onions. Persephone stood barefoot under the eaves while the water dripped from the rafters, her dress damp around the hems from gathering laundry before the storm broke. She liked the hush that came with rain, like the land itself was listening. Inside, Ira was bent over the kitchen table, mending a saddle strap with methodical care. His hands worked leather, and all with a quiet focus that never asked to be noticed. She watched him a moment longer before stepping inside, setting the basket down by the stove. "Storm's stalling out east," she said. "Creek'll be high tomorrow." He looked up, a faint crease in his brow. "Cattle'll need to stay penned. You know how to move them from the lower pasture." "I think so," she said. "You showed me last week. You remember better than most men I've hired," he said, returning to his work. "I try." "You don't try. You do." She leaned against the cupboard, arms crossed, watching the firelight flicker across the floorboards. "You always live this quiet," he tied off the stitch before answering. "I used to have a brother here, younger. He left for Helena 2 years ago, said there wasn't enough in dirt and fences to keep him. You ever think about leaving?" He set the strap down and met her eyes. "No, land raised me. I owe it something back." She nodded slowly, stepping closer, drawn by something in the steadiness of his voice. "I never had land," she said. "We moved every year. My father couldn't hold work long, and my mother, she was always tired. I used to dream of a place where we'd stay put, where the trees didn't change with every season." Ira rested his elbows on the table. "You've got that now." She gave a small smile, not one born of ease, but of something starting to take root. "I didn't think I'd be strong enough to want it again." "You are." The silence after his words wasn't empty. It held weight. Something unspoken passed between them, not new but not yet named. That night the rain kept on, and Persephone couldn't sleep. She sat at the window in her nightdress, legs drawn up, watching the wind bend the cottonwoods. A knock came at her door. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said as he stepped inside. "You didn't." He stayed near the threshold, hands loose at his sides. "Sometimes I walk the house when I can't settle." Her voice was soft. "Me too. I keep thinking about how I got here." Ira nodded once. "You didn't ask for what happened. But you've met it head on." "I still feel like I'm waiting for someone to tell me I've overstayed." He looked at her, long and quiet. "You haven't." She stood, the night air cool against her arms. "Do you ever wonder what it's like to be looked at and not weighed?" He stepped forward then, slow and certain, until they stood only a breath apart. "I see you," he said. "Not the mark, not the pain. Just you." Persephone's throat tightened, not from sorrow, but from the unfamiliar swell of being seen without shrinking. "You don't turn away," she whispered. "I never will." The wind pressed against the window pane, and neither of them moved for a long while. When she finally laid her hand against his chest, he covered it with his own, solid and warm and sure. No words followed. None were needed by morning. The rain had passed, and the sky was scraped clean. They rode out together to the upper pasture, the grass heavy with dew. Persephone guided the mare with confidence, Ira beside her, watching without correcting. A quiet pride showed in the way he rode near but didn't shadow her, At the fence line, she dismounted first and opened the gate for the cattle to pass through. The sun caught her hair as she stood there, and Ira saw it then not just her strength, but her ease, earned and full. "You're not just staying," he said. "You belong." She met his eyes, that same quiet blooming in her chest. "I know." By early June, the cottonwoods had thickened with green, and the heat climbed slow but steady, settling deep in the earth. Bees moved between the wild rose blooms that tangled along the fence line, and the lowing of cattle carried clear across the fields. Persephone moved through the days with practiced ease, mucking stalls, tending the kitchen garden, and keeping the chickens from nesting in the hayloft. Her skirts were stained and her hands calloused, but the work gave her a rhythm she hadn't known she needed. It steadied her, gave her shape. Ira had taken to letting her handle more of the ranch's day-to-day tasks, only stepping in when something required heavy lifting or a second pair of hands. He never hovered. He watched, though, quiet as always, but present. And when he did speak, it was never to correct, only to share, to teach, to trust. One afternoon, they rode into Red Bluff together to trade for seed and new tack. The general store was shaded by a canvas awning and smelled of soaps, burlap, and molasses. Inside, Persephone moved between shelves with a list Ira had written in tight, slanted letters. He lingered near the counter, thumbing through a box of new bridal bits. She returned with a sack of flour and a tin of camphor salve, setting them on the counter beside his things. The shopkeeper, a woman in her 50s with a face lined from squinting into prairie sun, looked from Persephone to Ira with thinly veiled curiosity. "You the one what came in on the train back in May?" she asked. Persephone nodded once, steady. "Thought so. Folks were talkin'. Said the fella you were set to marry left you high and dry." Ira's hand stilled on the bit he was inspecting. Persephone lifted her chin. "He did," she said, "but I found better ground." The woman blinked. Then, without comment, she wrapped the purchases and passed them over. Later, as they loaded the wagon, Ira didn't speak until she'd climbed onto the seat beside him. "You didn't flinch when she brought it up," he said. "She meant no harm," Persephone replied, "and I'm not ashamed of what happened." He reached for the reins but paused. "You shouldn't be." She looked at him, the lines of his profile lit gold by the late sun. "You've never once made me feel like I should." The corner of his mouth tugged, not in amusement but in something quieter, more rooted. "My mother used to say that a man's worth shows in how he holds silence," she added. Ira glanced at her. "Then I reckon I'm doing all right." They rode the rest of the way home in companionable quiet, the kind that filled itself without needing to be broken. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the air cooled, Persephone sat on the back steps peeling apples. Ira joined her with a whetstone and his knife, dragging it slow and sure along the steel. She didn't look up as she asked, "Did you ever think about marrying?" He didn't stop the motion. "Once," she waited. "Was a neighbor girl, strong-willed, laughed with her whole body. She married a horse trader out of Bozeman." Persephone nodded, slicing another strip of skin from the apple in her hand. "You ever regret not asking?" "I regret not knowing how to." She turned toward him. "You're not the same man now." "No," he said, "I'm not." She set the last apple in the bowl. "Neither am I." The light between them shifted, stretched thin by the sinking sun. Ira set his knife aside, wiping his hands on his trousers. He didn't reach for her, didn't crowd, just looked. "I think about you more than I mean to," he said, voice low, her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the gentle certainty of it. "Then mean to," she said. He dipped his head just enough to meet her eyes. "You've changed this place." "So have you," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back, but she didn't. Their foreheads touched before their lips did, and the kiss was quiet, warm with months of knowing. When it broke, she rested her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her like he'd done it 100 times before. They sat like that until the stars came. Neither of them spoke again that night because nothing needed saying. The next morning, Persephone rose with the sun and began boiling water for coffee. Ira came in from the barn, sweat already at his collar. She handed him a cup, their fingers brushing. "I was thinking," she said, eyes on the stove, "about putting in root vegetables near the back fence. That patch near the elm's good soil." He took a sip. "Sounds right. And maybe building a smokehouse near the creek for winter," he nodded. "We can do that." She looked at him then. He set his cup down and stepped close, brushing a damp curl from her brow. You and me, Persephone, I want that if you do. She didn't hesitate. I do. He kissed her again, slower this time, like a promise drawn out. And outside, the wind bent the grasses, the way it always had, but now, the ground beneath it held steady. The wedding took place on a Thursday, under a sky pale with high, thin clouds. No preacher came out from Red Bluff, it was Ira's neighbor, Mr. Kline, who had once read for the circuit and still kept a Bible and a straight back. They stood beneath the elm by the south fence, with the pasture stretched out behind them and the smell of split pine from the woodpile drifting on the breeze. Persephone wore a dress she'd sewn herself from unbleached muslin, plain and serviceable, with a band of blue ribbon stitched around the waist. Her hands didn't tremble when she folded them in front of her. Ira wore his cleanest shirt, collar stiff with lye soap and boots newly oiled. He hadn't shaved, but she hadn't asked him to. He looked like her home, after the vows, Mr. Kline nodded once, closed the Bible, and said, "Well, there you go." Then he tipped his hat and walked back to his wagon, leaving them standing there, husband and wife, with Persephone's hand still resting against Ira's. She turned her face toward him and said, "It feels like standing still in the best way." He cupped her cheek, not the scarred side, not the unscarred side, just her face, and kissed her like no one was watching. And they weren't, just whined and open land. Later, they shared bread and roast chicken at the table, and Ira brought out a small tin box from the cupboard. He slid it across the table. "What's that?" she asked. "Something I've been working on." Inside, wrapped in a square of linen, was a brooch made of pressed wildflowers, yarrow, prairie smoke, and a single strand of her hair woven into the pin's backing. "I had Mrs. Kline show me how to set them," he said. "She does that sort of thing." Said the flowers wouldn't hold forever, but long enough. Persephone ran her fingers over the petals. "You remembered I always stopped to look at the ones by the gate. I remember anything you linger on." The next morning, she woke before dawn, her husband already gone to the barn. She dressed quietly and stepped outside barefoot, the ground cool beneath her toes. A fog hung low in the pasture, and the horses moved like ghosts through it. She walked to the fence and watched them until the sun began to burn off the mist. Ira came up from the creek, boots damp, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the house." He leaned against the fence beside her. "What about it? It needs a porch swing." "And I want to paint the shutters," he glanced at her. "You're already planning years ahead." "I am," she said, "because I want them with you." He nodded once, then looked out at the field. "There's a stretch of land past the cottonwood line. Never used it for much. If we cleared it, could build a second cabin, something with a real kitchen." "For what?" "For more years. More people, maybe, if that's what you want." She turned toward him, the sun climbing behind her. "I do." He reached for her hand, not urgent, just sure, and they stood like that as the fog gave way to light. The land around them didn't shift or swell, it just stayed, firm underfoot and waiting. Persephone rested her head against his shoulder. "I used to think quiet meant empty. And now it means full." Ira kissed her temple and said, "Let's build the rest of it slow." And they did. By late August, the grass along the southern edge of the property had turned brittle and seamed with gold. Persephone drew water from the well in the early morning, her back damp beneath her dress, and set the pail down beside the basin with a satisfied exhale. Crickets chirped in the weeds, and the air smelled of iron and wheat dust. Inside, Ira was oiling the hinges on the front door, crouched low, his sleeves rolled past his elbows. Persephone stepped onto the porch and leaned against the post, watching him work. "Door never squeaked until the storm last week," she said. Wood swelled. Needed time to dry. She reached for the rag beside him, dabbing a streak of oil from his forearm. "You ever get tired of fixing things?" He looked up. "No, not when they're worth keeping." She sat beside him on the threshold. "That applies to people too." He didn't hesitate. "Especially them." They fell quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for filling. A wagon creaked past on the road a ways off, the driver's whistle drifting through the heat. Persephone broke the silence. "I got a letter yesterday from my aunt in Ohio." He glanced at her, alert but unpressing. "She heard I married. Someone from town must have written, she wants to come visit. Ira leaned back on his heels. You want her to? I'm not sure. She's not unkind, just fixed in her ways. Last time she saw me was before the fire. Might not know what to make of this life. He looked out toward the fields. You built it, that's what matters. Persephone nodded slowly. I'd still like her to see what I've made of myself, with you. Then let her come. She rested her head briefly against his shoulder. I don't want to feel like I need to prove anything. You don't, he said. But if showing her gives you peace, then we'll host her. Later that week, Persephone took to cleaning out the extra room they hadn't used since the spring calving swept the floorboards, aired the linens, and stitched a new curtain from leftover ticking. Ira reinforced the porch railing and mended the loose slat on the back step without comment. There was no rush in their movements, just a mutual understanding that preparing for someone else's eyes didn't mean changing what they were. On the day her aunt arrived, the noon train clattered in under a high, pale sky. Persephone met her at the platform, her hair braided down her back, a basket of apples in her hand. Her aunt stepped down with a travel-worn carpet bag and a look that was half concern, half relief. You look so grown, she said after a long pause. You've filled out. Persephone met her gaze. I'm not the girl you remember, no, her aunt said. You're not. They rode back in silence for a time, the road soft with dust. Her aunt studied the land, the low hills stitched with fence posts, the barn roof patched with new tin. You run all this, with my husband. He must be a patient man. Persephone glanced at her. He's a good man. When they reached the house, Ira was splitting kindling behind the shed. He wiped his hands on his trousers and offered a nod, not stiff, just reserved. Her aunt studied him a moment. You're younger than I expected, and you're more direct than I was warned, Ira said, not unkindly. Persephone stifled a laugh, and her aunt huffed something that wasn't quite disapproval. That night, after supper, the three of them sat on the porch. The cicadas had started up, their song rising and falling like breath. Her aunt watched the stars emerge one by one. This isn't what I pictured for you, she said. I know, Persephone replied, but you're steady now, stronger than I thought you'd be. Persephone didn't answer right away. She reached for Ira's hand under the edge of the blanket draped across their laps. He laced his fingers with hers without looking away from the tree line. I found my place, she said simply. Her aunt stayed a week, and when she left, she hugged Persephone tighter than expected. You've made a life, she whispered. A fine one. When the wagon pulled away, Persephone stayed at the gate, watching until the dust settled. Ira came up behind her, arms loose around her waist. You're quieter than usual, he said. I think I finally feel known, she said. By someone who saw me before and sees me now. That mattered to you, she turned in his arms, not as much as being known by you. They walked back to the house together. That evening, Persephone brought out a folded piece of paper from the drawer beside the stove. She unfolded it and laid it on the table. I've been drawing plans, she said. He leaned over her shoulder. For what? A schoolhouse, just 2 rooms. There are more families settling near the river bend. The children need a place to learn. You teach. I'd help, maybe not alone. But I want to start it. He rested his hand on the back of her neck. Then we'll build it. She looked up at him. You sure? I want to make things with you, not just fences and walls. Things that grow beyond us. They did build it over the course of the fall, with lumber hauled in from Helena and help from neighbors who'd heard about the idea. By winter, the walls stood, and 2 local women agreed to teach when Persephone couldn't. Ira carved a sign for the front that read, Riverbend School, and mounted it himself. The land held its frost through February, but inside their home it was warm. Persephone rose early to bake, and Ira brought in wood before the cold bit too deep. They read together in the evenings, her voice soft over the crackle of the fire, his hand resting on her knee one night as snow fell thick against the windows. Persephone stood in the kitchen, cradling something small in both hands. Ira, she said, her voice low. He crossed the room in 3 steps, searching her face. She held out the knotted bundle of linen. It's early yet, but I'm sure. He opened it slowly, revealing the sprig of dried mint and the stone she'd kept from the creek, a sign between them, one they'd agreed on if ever the time came. His arms wrapped around her, strong and shaking. "You're certain," she nodded. "We're going to have a child." He didn't speak, just held her forehead pressed to hers until breath and heartbeat evened out. They built a cradle together that spring, from pine, no nails. Just dowels and dovetail joints. Ira carved a small flower into the top rail, a prairie bloom that only came up after rain. When the child came a girl, red-cheeked and squalling the house filled with new rhythms and softer voices. Persephone rocked her beneath the elm tree, the same place she and Ira had said their vows. He sat nearby, whittling, pausing now and then to watch them. The land kept its seasons. The cattle grew fat. The porch swing creaked in the wind. Their life didn't swell into something grand. It deepened layer by layer, year by year into something whole, and they stayed. Together, through every morning's light and every night's hush, in the home they built with hands and heart and unshaken love.